This is Masks and Monsters of Mexican Golden Age Comics and the Mystery of Their Modern Obscurity. I am your host, Keith J. Rainville. Since the late 80s, I've worked in every facet of comics, retail, wholesale, and creative. In the 90s, I published from Parts Unknown magazine, bringing Lucha Libre pop culture to any new audience we could find. And that led to a modest indie book imprint ever since. I've designed posters for the Grand Olympic and Lucha Boom, and wrote the Fox Azteca animated film Los Campeones de la Lucha Libre from the creators of Mucha Lucha. I come to you today not as an expert, but as an enthusiast. I'm living proof of how quickly one can fall in love with this era of comics regardless of any geographic or language barrier. Consider this presentation fan to fan. We're going to be diving into Golden Age El Santo comics and feature some creatures you've probably never seen. And we'll end up addressing some tough questions as to why decades of best-selling vintage comics are so relatively unknown here in the States. Okay, let's go back in time to a Mexican newsstand in the 1940s for some Golden Age amazingness. For starters, the traditional Mexican newsstand is going to play an important part in the narrative here. Decades before the development of the comic book store, newsstands from the shallow storefronts a city block long to the little wooden locker sheds near bus stops were the primary source of comic book distribution and redistribution. This is where the classic Mexican retail model for comics is important to look at too. A newsstand got new comics hot off the press daily. In the case of this El Santo comic, 3 times a week. It would sell at full price for the first time, and some lucky kid would be very happy. He takes that comic home, and it gains an entire new audience. A culturally strong nuclear household, potentially 2 to 3 generations in any given home. This comic gets passed around to everyone from little brothers to grandma. That well-read family heirloom can then be brought back to the same newsstand and sold for credit towards a new issue. The used back issue is resold at a discount to another kid, and thus another extended family. Then he takes it back and repeats that cycle again and again, until the comic nearly falls apart. And then 50 years later, some idiot in the States pays a huge markup for it, but that's a whole different story. We're going back to this. This is what's actually important. Any given copy of a Mexican comic book could have 4 to 6 readers per household, then be recycled to 3 to 4 other households. The bigger hit comics with million print runs, each issue having multiple readers, you can say without hyperbole that everyone was reading these El Santo comics. And how about that Santo? The single most important enmascarado in history. The notion of a hooded grappler dates back to 1860s Paris, in fact, with the first masked wrestlers like Enmascarado Maravilla emerging in the early 20th century. But in the mid-40s, sports gear specialist Deportes Martinez perfects the modern wrestling mask. El Santo paints his silver, and so is born the first multimedia masked wrestler megastar. Gifted with a superb physique and possessing a ring style that mixed two-fisted grappling with flashy high flying, and clad in a silver-woven hood inspired by Dumas's The Man in the Iron Mask, El Santo quickly became a national sensation and an icon of Lucha Libre. In 1951, he jumped from squared circle to comic page, becoming the titular star of a Revista Atomica, approximately 6 by 7 inch digest, typically around 36 pages in length. The interiors were printed in a single color ink, black, deep blue, or dark green, and a signature sepia tone brown that I'm most fond of. You can see it there at right. The covers were printed in full color and were never short on lurid subject matter or bizarre predicaments for our silver-masked hero. Man, that's just pure terror right there. Jose G. Cruz, a prolific creator in many trades, screenwriter, movie poster artist, comic publisher, saw solid gold in Santo's silver mask. It was raw clay he could import into different entertainment media. In the 1940s, Cruz and his ace art director Jose Trinidad Romero pioneered the technique of fotomontaje, where an illustrated comic art was married to photos of posed models and actors. Then it was augmented with painted special effects. Here, we see a real photo of the real Santo battling an absolutely illustrated Black Panther, which, by the way, looks a lot like those porcelain statues on everyone's grandma's mantle. Santo, in wrestling gear, was brought into studios, photographed in all sorts of dramatic and action stances, sitting in chairs to simulate driving a vehicle or walking around in casual wear, throwing a punch, whatever they needed or would need in the future. The flying pose here could have easily been repurposed as a dive off the top rope or a dive off a high cliff. This bank of ready-to-use photos allowed Santo to literally star in his own comic and to battle anything the artist could imagine. A formula was perfected. Santo starred as himself, a ring star who would moonlight as a crime fighter. He had a hotline to the police, and scientists called him in for muscle when some supernatural entity was running amok. The books were both cinematic, embodied by a real-life human in actual photos, and fantastic, taking the hero to realms impossible for TV or film to achieve in a pre-digital world. But it always came back to professional wrestling. No better way to deal with a giant bat than a chin lock. And did you know you can totally bear hug a shark? And when confronted by a swampy walrus man monster, the good old chair shot will not let you down. The baddies Santo faced were so out there, they often took center stage on his own covers. And the contrast of photorealistic hero versus art-directed villain really popped, whether they were illustrated or 3D sculpted models photographed in the style of an old Viewmaster reel. Google it, kids. Boundless creativity within the confines of the comic panel allowed Santo to take on the likes of dinosaurs, non-union equivalents of the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and even kings. Hey, I should point out here that vintage Mexican comic book covers are very often complete lies. Cruz in particular was a master of promising epic showdowns and dream matches with famous Hollywood properties, none of which actually occurred inside the pages of the book. This King Kong cover's interior story, for instance, was about bank robbers. And no, Santo never grappled the Metaluna mutant, certainly didn't dodge a blaster shot from Princess Leia, nor fight the Tabanga of From Hell It Came, or this Franken Dracula, whatever that is. And sadly, no, Christopher Lee as Hammer's Dracula was not a recurring villain. More common were supernatural menaces like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, demons from hell, the Grim Reaper himself, ancient Egyptian ghosts, or maybe the Virgin Mary herself in an intergender match. Skeletons? Big problem for lucha heroes. This is literally a skeleton in the closet with a sword, right out of Harryhausen. Skeletons would creep on Santo's girlfriends, do the bidding of their hairy vampire masters, Aggressive lady skeletons would jump Santo in his living room. And then sometimes Santo would creep on lesbian skeletons, which seems to have been a thing because it happened repeatedly, and I'm not commenting any further. Suffering the incredible shrinking man treatment was another common ailment for the Saint. From shrinking doctors to wooden artist models, cats and mice, and man, do lucha heroes have zero tolerance for rats. The undead, from ghouls to zombies, was probably the most common category of villain by far. The photographic process allowed for some rather cheap Halloween masks and oatmeal makeup to be enhanced by pen and ink in post too. Top left panel, textbook example of the full potential of fotomontaje. Illustrated skeletons, a brushwork body, and a photo of a clay head or mask on a model. Brilliant. Genre bending, one of the absolute greatest strengths of the lucha hero. El Santo was just at home in space as he was in the ring. And Kit Bash kid toys and clay sculptures made for some really nifty aliens. True fact, El Santo, so manly, didn't even need a shirt on the moon. Western settings were just as popular, both in the form of time travel stories and modern frontera action. Now, hey, while this is up on screen, you may have been noticing throughout this show a distinct variation of El Santo's ring gear and even general physique. And that's because it's two different people. We're going to get into this whole mess later on in the video, so just hold tight. Cruz and Santo sold millions of comics in the 50s and 60s. The collage process allowed for factory-like production that, at its peak, saw new issues coming out 3 times a week. Cruz faced a mutiny of his art crew when he contemplated going daily. With Santo becoming woven into the fabric of Mexican popular entertainment, Cruz pushed him to get into motion pictures as early as 1951. But Santo actually turned down the lead role in a pioneering serial that still cashed in on his name anyway. By the end of the 1950s, Santo was taking small roles in comedic crime caper films. But in the early 60s, filmmakers like Federico Curiel and Rene Cardona took the formula laid by Jose G. Cruz and put it on screen. The golden age of Mexican comics had led directly to the golden age of Mexican superhero cinema. And all with a real-life media figure at its core, the wrestler moonlighting as crime fighter, just like he had done in the comics. Although the fantastic creatures, giant monsters, and supernatural settings of the comics kinda set too high a bar for the average B-movie budget to achieve, but the filmmakers did their damnedest. Hey, by the way, this Frankenstein here is Manuel Leal, best known as the luchador Tinieblas. By the way, if you only see one lucha movie in your life, make it Santo and Blue Demon versus the Monsters. Trust me. In the States, we don't even have a cultural equivalent to the lucha hero triple threat of ring, comics, and film, especially based on a real dude you could actually shake hands with. Maybe imagine Evel Knievel starring in 50 action movies in the 70s as himself, in between bike jumps while his comic book outsells Spider-Man or something. That might approach a parallel, but even then, not really. Multimedia masked wrestler megastar indeed. The Santo fotomontaje model would be repeated for other famous luchadors as well. As you can see, imitation was the sincerest form of flattery. Enmascarados in space, getting shrunk down, and battling rats. If El Santo was Mexico's Superman, Blue Demon was its Batman. Sometimes rival, often partner of Santo, Demon was arguably superior in the ring. Unencumbered by the nigh-literal sainthood of his silver mask counterpart, Blue was more of a two-fisted, down-to-earth common man, thrust into all sorts of weird situations. The fotomontaje was largely the same technique of Cruz and Crew, but relied on photographic backgrounds and less pen and ink work. His series was traditional Silver Age comic size, which allowed for bigger cover art, and yes, all sorts of false promises abound. Barnabas Collins of Dark Shadows, not in the book. Blue Demon did face the usual array of Universal Monster knockoffs, though. And your typical melting monks, cannibal butchers, and karate bald girls. The cover at left cribs art from at least 3 different sources? That's just brilliant. Lucha Heroes did not get along with hippies either. Now, at right here is one of my favorite, if not the absolute favorite page in the entire realm of fotomontaje. The art team has repurposed a Visible Man model kit. Like, remember those? for Demon to fight here, although not being posable at all really kind of limited the action in this scene. But, I mean, that's just so amazing. Another common practice, using kids in Halloween masks as dwarven menaces. I am not kidding, and good luck unseeing this. The zombie on this cover is a predecessor to the Do You Want a Party corpse at the end of Return of the Living Dead. Blue Demon also had a run of books in Peru. Now, I've never been able to get a hold of one of these, but they seem to mix some new illustrated material with reprints of the old fotomontaje. Interesting, on the back covers, they preview the interiors, but in full color. I believe this is the only color application of the process anywhere. The series also had 100% more creepy baby covers. Look at the dent in that kid's head. What did you even do, Blue? On to the dashing and dapper Huracan Ramirez. A legendary wrestler in his own right, he starred in a series heavy on sports-based stories. Ramirez actually began as a movie character, beginning with a rather excellent family drama in 1952. Find this and see it. It's really fun. And it has one of the finest movie posters ever rendered, in my opinion. That's just gorgeous. Other movies in the Huracan series would be centered more on social issues than supernatural stories. In the comics, while some requisite monster fighting did take place, his foes were generally more terrestrial. There's a lot more outright Lucha Libre in Huracan's books, too. Here he is at right with another Lucha legend, El Matematico, playing football for who knows why. And who's a better soccer goalie than a masked wrestler? Take a sec here to look at how simple but effective that charcoal pencil background is. It's just brilliant. Love the contrast of the photo subject to the super vague rough background. Now, Huracan's series devolved into a lot of bad comedy. The most bizarre element of which was his mini sidekick Tito. Tito was created by pasting the head of a grown-ass man onto the body of a child. And I won't go further into it because I just want this off my screen. True story on Huracan before we move on. I met him like 18 years ago. And he slapped me across the chest as a gesture of friendship and thanks for my magazine work. No, not kidding. True story. Still recovering. Anyway, here's the other big Lucha Hero series from Jose G. Cruz's factory, The Black Shadow. Shadow was a frequent tag team partner with Blue Demon. He'd be unmasked by Santo in one of Lucha Libre's most legendary matches. You can see footage of it embedded in the film Santo vs. the Zombies. Although a comparatively obscure series when put next to Santo's, there's great action nonetheless. These were also in that 6x7 Revista Atomica format, and had the same cover layout and style. Also the same arrangement of Jose G. Cruz's name, above and bigger than any wrestler he was ever featuring. We'll come back to this further down the line. Inside, the same great goofy creatures abound. Here's a cheap gorilla suit augmented by some garish pen and ink work. Per union rules of Lucha Libre Local 101, no tolerance for rats. And in the realm of fotomontaje, the term frogman has a way more literal meaning. There's one drawback to this series. It's Shadow's simple black mask, which turns into an inky mess compared to the detail you got from Santos. Shadow having lost that mask probably didn't help book sales either. This page here is an absolutely superb comic book high spot, and for sure nothing you could safely pull off with human actors on a movie set. And here's my personal favorite, Neutron el Enmascarado Negro. This is yet another character to appear on screen first, in a series of superb films starring Mexican screen icon Wolf Ruvinsky. Interestingly, Neutron was not a wrestling character, just a movie superhero from a studio that recognized Lucha Libre gear was the best costuming they could get. Ruvinsky was too busy or high-priced to take time out for comic book photo shoots, so in print the mask was filled by model Marco Arzate. Unique to both screen and page, Neutron had a joker to his Batman, a recurring supervillain named Dr. Carante. Carante, a maniacal mad scientist with the same level of muscle and fighting skill as his heroic foil, absolutely stole the show. Early covers were illustrated, but then gave way to photo covers later on. The comics crew was evidently concerned about him looking too much like Black Shadow, maybe, and injected some color into his costume. Ironically, for a character that's not an outright wrestler, the combat in the Neutron books is the most Lucha Libre literate of any fotomontaje series. Drop kicks, head scissors, and grappling abound, especially when he faced off against Carante. There are some particularly amazing aliens in this series, who are met with the usual two-fisted lucha-hero diplomacy. Neutron was traditional comic size, so the art is nice and big compared to the digests. It's been one of the harder series to track down. Also, latter issues center entirely on a boy sidekick character, and are often sans the titular hero entirely, so buyer beware. Let's step back a minute to look at why the Lucha Hero model works so well in the first place. Put yourself in the role of a comic publisher or film producer, and let's think about some factors here. Action hero credibility. Simply put, when your star has a physique like this, you don't have to explain why he's capable of fighting crime. Plus, these people were already masters of Mexico's martial art, Lucha Libre. We all know wrestling is real, so these moves will absolutely work on the street, or a subterranean lair. And let's be real. If you're being attacked by one of these critters, wouldn't you want the person saving you to actually look the part? Secondly, the luchador as talent was the total package. Not only would this dude have a pre-existing character to exploit, he'd have a pre-existing fan base ready to be activated. And he'd show up in his own costume too. The fortune you'd save on capes and masks alone would pay for catering. The wrestlers also have locker room buddies looking to make an extra buck. So any monsters, goons, or henchmen you need on set can be played by moonlighting luchadors who serve as their own stuntmen too. And as many low-budget B-movies need to fill out the runtime, old ring footage of the wrestlers is the best padding you can get. A byproduct of this practice, though, is these movies have a lot of the only known footage of truly historical moments and stars of yesteryear. They're a real time capsule by the accident of runtime padding. These side gigs were also a huge boon for the luchadors. Negotiating the shark-filled waters of Lucha Libre promoters is dangerous indeed, so Filling out one's financial portfolio with some comic or movie work brings them right to your door. Once the genre's established, dozens come running. True fact here, Blue Demon's entire screen career is a direct result of him getting injured in a ring accident and being unable to wrestle. Slapping vampires and werewolves upside the head paid his rent while he healed up. And lastly, having a hit comic book series gave a wrestler one more thing to sign at the merch table. Finally, and you TMNT fans will be familiar with this, cross-promotion. We've mentioned that pre-existing fan base already. That starts a circular cycle of self-feeding cross-promotion like gasoline on a fire. Every high-profile main event match puts that guy's mask everywhere around town, which makes the comic book more recognizable to the passerby of a newsstand. Every comic bought piques the interest of the reader to see that same character on the big screen or TV. And when that comic book or movie star can actually be seen in real life down at the local arena, ticket sales go up. It's just beautiful. But more than any of these four aspects, it is this, the mask, that is the true core of the lucha-hero model's success. Let's look at other superhero executions from previous decades in other countries. At any given time, what you're seeing here was literally the best costuming Hollywood could offer. Look at the screen history of Captain America. Until the mid-2000s, this was the best they could rig up. And this is an easy character with no superpowers and no mega digital effects needed. And these were the best solutions they had. This is the Spider-Man mask from the 1977 CBS made-for-TV movies. This is the best they could do for a well-budgeted major TV network production. At the same time, these guys were legit fighting in these masks 5 times a week. No one to yell cut, no second takes, no camera tricks, no helping any lack of vision or no overdubbing a dialogue later, nothing. They had to work live. The Lucha mask was perfect practical combat headwear for a superhero. Even in Japan, where they mastered live-action superhero costuming, the tokusatsu characters have one thing missing the Lucha mask easily provides: the humanity. You see these people under the hoods. You make eye contact, you interpret their personalities, you hear their real voices. The eyes alone are enough to make the hero infinitely more relatable than someone under a molded, expressionless helmet. Nowhere on Earth is there a better vehicle for delivering a graphical identity and retaining the humanity and emotion of the subject. The wearer can be iconic and act and fight all at the same time. The Lucha mask is 100% practical, 100% marketable, and 100% merchandisable. Why no other media entity embraced this gear for superheroes, beyond me. Okay, to see what happened at the end of the Lucha Hero era, we return to El Santo and Jose G. Cruz. Their adventures sold like gangbusters. The monsters were held at bay, the kids had smiles on their faces, and the money rolled in. But in the mid-1970s, danger was afoot. And here's where we'll talk about this guy we mentioned earlier. Santo was undeniably the Elvis of Lucha Libre, but he was also now in the last stages of his ring career, and the movies were honestly in the process of jumping the shark. So in shoring up for his pending retirement, money conflicts with Cruz, remember the man who billed himself over Santo on every comic book cover, escalated. In '74, it all came to a head, and the two split their partnership in court, battling over who actually owned the idiom of the silver mask. Santo had the hood, the name, the ring stardom prior to the comic, and decades of dues paid in the squared circle. Cruz, however, was legit the visionary who transformed Santo into a hero and a defender of justice in the streets. The court sided with Santo. He got to keep his name in Silver Hood and would continue working into the 80s. Cruz, however, kept the El Santo moniker specifically for use in comic books. In an openly hostile snub to his former star, Cruz hired Mexico's Mr. Universe, Hector Pliego, a burly bodybuilder, to replace Santo in a newly designed mask. Note the S on the forehead. And with new, less ring gearish costuming for this non-wrestler, so was born the era of Fake Santo, or as they call him in New York, Fugazi Santo, or as they call him at Harvard, Ersatz Santo, or Erzantso. I'm workshopping that, so don't quote me. It was a sneaky, sleazy move, but one Cruz actually boasted about in public, claiming Erzantso, that does work, was younger, buffer, and more appealing to a young audience. For the first few years of this new era, the old stories from the 50s were recycled. The Santo photos literally peeled off the 20-year-old original art and replaced with new shots of the new guy. Despite the out-of-fashion interiors being reused, Cruz took to painting new and increasingly exotic covers with a vengeance. And in all honesty, some of these are pretty damned amazing. They were also now in a larger, more traditional comic format with glossy cover stock. However, just a few years later, the quality of execution dropped off a cliff. The stories were all new now, and as the Erzantso run went on, the product got lamer and lamer. Like this riveting homage to My Dinner with Andre. Largely gone were the dragons and space aliens. In were cattle rustlers and evil carnies and, once again, dirty hippies. The fantastical brush art environments gave way to hastily photographed office buildings and living rooms. The best days of El Santo and fotomontaje were sadly over. The 1980s saw the end of a multifaceted era. The great El Santo passed away, and Lucha Libre was a decade away from seeing its next generation of global superstars emerge. The Mexican comic book industry shifted to full-color reprints of American superhero and science fiction titles. And a continuing fascination with foreign characters thrived at the expense of indigenous talent. With fotomontaje appearing antique and out of touch, and movie posters moving to photographic treatments, Jose G. Cruz left the whole scene behind, relocating to Los Angeles, where he passed away 5 years after Santo. While the Silver Masked Man's films found new life on cable TV and VHS, the comics never saw reprint. No treasury editions, no hardbound compendiums, nothing. This massive chapter in media history, as unique and distinct as anything else anywhere, anytime, and with such potential universal appeal, just disappeared from the entertainment vocabulary of the world. I was a full-blown fan of Lucha Libre and Mexican cinema and wrote about them professionally for years before I even knew Santo starred in comics. It'd be years more before I ever got my hands on some beat-up old copies, too. For a comic book run with such massive sales and influence on other media, to have no awareness beyond a small group of obsessive collectors is as baffling as it is frustrating. Yes, lucha heroes persisted in Mexico. The 2000s would see short-run revivals of the old characters, now embodied by second-generation wrestlers in the ring. But these series were very American in execution, and lacked the unique charm and homegrown innovation of previous decades. The classic fotomontaje remains in relative obscurity to this day. To my knowledge, never remastered or translated into any other language or any other international market. There isn't even a strong underground scanlation community, The lucha-hero in vintage pulp is a very endangered species. So why has such a significant chapter in international comics yet to benefit from fandom's nostalgia and a curiosity of the obscure? I refuse to believe this has the power to suppress such good stuff from finding a larger audience. There's no way this is preventing me from owning a dozen trade paperbacks of El Santo or every new Throne issue in ebook format. I'm just like that kid who wanted a Santo comic from the newsstand. So how do we make this happen? For starters, we need a breakthrough translation effort, the first risk taker, the first committed publisher. What we need is what First Comics did with Lone Wolf and Cub. Another property, by the way, that is equally represented in comics and movies. Or we need that adventurous boutique publisher to activate a more daring and liberal audience with a lucha equivalent to Batmanga. I'm hopeful we're seeing the early stages of new interest in lucha heroes right now. This summer, the El Rey Network finally started airing lucha hero movies with subtitles. Why this didn't happen at the height of Lucha Underground is beyond me, but hey, it's happening now. And Kino Lorber has just announced 4K restorations of El Santo's first two films, in a bilingual effort that promises some good extras. This is just tremendous news. But to keep this going, some larger, deeper issues need to be addressed. And they come from both sides of the border. Perceived value is the biggest misconception we need to conquer up here, especially at a corporate level. The industry really needs to look at the Latino audience and its potential buying power. Needs to recognize 25% of the superhero movie audience is Latino, and then they need to recognize the strengths of Latino-generated media, new and old. If Mexican media had even a fraction of the perceived value Japanese media does, we'd be hip-deep in fotomontaje reprints already. Mechanical obstacles exist as well, and every day that goes by make these more worrisome. A company looking to do a reprint volume of old Santo comics would want to start with an English-language edition of an existing book from Mexico. And right now, that book just doesn't exist. Blame a culture for undervaluing its own output, blame classicism for pigeonholing comics as too lowbrow to invest in, but those arguments are not for me to make. What I can attest to are the mechanical realities of reprinting this work. Does the original art even exist? Did Cruz ruin all the Santo pages with the fake Santo run? Does anyone have a complete run of the books in good enough shape to scan? You've all been looking at a lot of rather soft and decaying art for the past 45 minutes. These things weren't manufactured that well to start with. They survived multiple owners and 70 years of lousy air. These books were read, not collected. I'm going to repeat that. They were read, not collected. Not bagged and boarded by a single owner. They were loved. Too loved. There's now a legit question of, do we have a good enough archive to do this? And then there's rights. A potential mess that can and has scared off a lot of investors. Let's go back to this guy. For any given lucha hero, there's a Lucha Libre promoter, and these guys are hammerheads. The wrestler under the mask, who actually took all the physical punishment. Then there's the mask artisan, who may have been responsible for a graphical choice or color scheme that really caught on with the public. There's a comic publisher whose media was the most frequently released. And a movie producer who's invested more money in the guy than anyone else ever did and has all that money to make back. And then there's the estates of any of these original contributors, who have a legit stake in any perceived big money deal made in the States. But the underlying reason these rights are so hard to negotiate? Trust. With so many publishers and studios so long defunct, so many original creatives long deceased, and so many third, fourth, fifth, sixth party new owners around, from widows and grandkids to shady folk in Juarez who own used car lots, trusting that you've actually negotiated a safe future for yourself is not so easy. From the point of view of the legit rights holders, say for example the family of a lucha legend who for 3 generations have protected that sacred mask and want to continue doing so for future generations, how trusting would you be of a corporation with deep pockets for a legal department from a country more than willing to exploit Latinos and who is currently putting your own people in cages at the border? But I really do believe the right people are out there who see the value of these endangered species and know how to package them for a whole new audience, and have the skill to overcome these obstacles from both north and south. In the meantime, there's plenty we as audience can do to drum up interest in our own fandom communities. Ask your local comic shop if they have any old Mexican comics in those back issue bins, and if no, why not? If you're lucky enough to get a hold of some vintage pulp, share it on social media. The old lucha-hero movies are way more accessible, and there's a bunch on YouTube right now. Watch one, throw a review up somewhere, share a weird-ass clip, share images of amazing posters. And if you know any of those niche obsessives, I don't, but if you do, just about any genre from superheroes to vampires to kaiju has some sort of bizarre south of the border equivalent that even the most jaded of completists has never seen. I myself really love mummies. Like, too much. And since diving into old Mexican movies, I have found so many I never knew existed. Here's what it comes down to. The more of us adding vintage Mexican media to the fandom vocabulary, the more we expose it to others, and the more we demystify this alien material. The more we give this stuff a chance to get out from underfoot of cultural and industry ambivalence. The more the tides of awareness rise, the more likely we'll catch someone's eye who can take things to the next business level. And man, oh man, can this stuff catch your eye. I mean, look at it, it's so good. And it's in danger of fading away forever. And we need to be the heroes that save it.